Have you ever wanted to produce so fast the flames fly out of your mouse? No, me neither, but if you get stuck in a 4 or 8 bar loop and struggle with arrangement, there are 6 workflow techniques that if you implement them today, that will help you go from that dreaded 8 bar loop to a finished track. These are just some of the techniques that have helped our accelerator students like Leopard Step, who since joining us has now produced and released over 60 tracks. That is crazy. Or Soren, who recently had 5 tracks signed to his favorite label. It works for those guys, so it can help you too. And if you want my free speed writing cheat sheet to download and open up on your desktop whenever you're producing, you can get it for free using the link below. Okay, let's get to it.
Workflow technique number 1 is simply learning your keyboard shortcuts.
Because learning the main keyboard shortcuts of your software and assigning your own personal ones will allow you to produce much faster. Think of it like adding grease to the bearings of productivity. Your creative process doesn't constantly get slowed down by having to click around the screen with your pointer. Now, I'm not suggesting you need to learn all the keyboard shortcuts, but by learning a few, like how to split clips, create new channels and instruments, preview sounds, and turn favorite plugins on and off will give you a huge boost. Personally, one of my favorite shortcuts allows me to switch my entire mix to mono so I can quickly check if it's still balanced without being distracted by the stereo field. I also use a trackball as I can assign commands to these buttons on the side, like switching apps, scrolling, and opening menus. Now, I used to use a mouse for years, but I ended up developing carpal tunnel syndrome from too much moving and clicking. My wrist ended up hurting all the time, and I actually had to train myself how to use my left hand. But since switching to a trackball about 15 years ago, it hasn't happened since. So by combining a good keyboard and learning the keyboard shortcuts and something like a trackball, your productivity is going to really speed up. The second thing to start using ASAP is a DAW template that works for you. That's where you save your default product to include particular channels, instruments, and effects that you always use already loaded in so you can hit the ground running whenever you open a new project. This might save you 5 or 10 minutes with each project, but over time this really adds up. A word of warning though, I've actually created default templates in the past that are so exhaustive and that go into so much detail, I found they ended up directing my creativity down a similar path each time, and I ended up finding that quite restrictive. This can be useful if you're creating a body of work in one style, like an album or an EP, but nowadays I prefer to keep it lean and mean, so here's what I do for mine. I set up a room reverb on an auxiliary channel with a short decay so I can just feed a little bit of many elements into it. It really gels the mix together. I also set up a mono switch, as I mentioned earlier, for checking my mix in mono. I put this on the master channel. I then have a couple of metering plugins that I always use and a drum rack, as that's what I use for programming drums. Boom. Lovely. Number 3 is to use sample packs and favorites folders. This could technically be classed as 2 separate tips, I guess, but the overall idea is to have a great selection of sounds that you can draw upon easily. That means organized in a way that works for you. Think of a chef having all the best ingredients chopped and prepped before he starts cooking. Then when it's time to cook, he knows exactly what to reach for and where it is, without having to stop and break his flow. It's exactly the same with music production, and the beauty is you only have to do this once and then just update it a bit every couple of years. Personally, I have my folders organized into these categories that I'm showing now, but I won't talk through all of them as it would be boring, but feel free to pause this video and screenshot it if you feel it's going to help. And every time I find a sample that I really like, I also save it into my favorites folders. So spend a session researching and buying a couple of really great sample and preset packs that fit the style of music you want to make, and you can do this just by doing some Google searches, reading the reviews, and listening to the demo tracks that they usually show on their sales pages. Splice and LoopCloud are another 2 great resources for this. Then organize them into categories that make sense to you. You can also use tagging to help you do this now. And if you devote a few hours to this just once, I guarantee you your productivity will shoot through the roof. The next tip is to have a clear target for every track you make and every production session. This is the key to producing quickly. Opening a blank DAW project can be very intimidating, as we quite literally have infinite options at this point. Couple that with no time frame or deadline, and we're really screwed. I found, ironically, the more constraints we put upon ourselves, the more focused our energy becomes and the more creative and productive we become. So by deciding the kind of music you want to make before even starting, you will have already put constraints on yourself, and this is good. Those constraints could be tempo, the kind of sounds that you use, the kind of chord progressions you'll be making, as producing a drum and bass track is going to be completely different from producing a house track. Now, I use reference tracks for this. I listen to music in the style I want to make, and then I use that as a guide for making creative decisions. Now, of course, we can deviate from these reference tracks if we feel like it, but having some sort of target guide helps remove a lot of the overwhelm and indecision. Then for each production session, I work out what I want the outcome of that session to be. For example, I like to come up with the main loop idea in just one session to capture the vibe, and then come back in another session and tweak it if needs be. After a break, I've got fresh ears anyway, and I can usually hear pretty quickly if something needs changing. Then Then I'll come back in another session, and the goal of that session will be to arrange that idea into a full track. Once again, using a reference track as a guide, I'll try and map it out all in one go. This is what happens. You come up with a loop and you think, yeah man, this is awesome. But then you listen to it over and over and over again until you get sick of it, and then you just want to give up and move on to the next project. Well, by using a track to help map out the arrangement of your song, you can avoid this altogether, or largely anyway. Just work out which parts of your template track is the drop and the break, and where the different instruments come in, and then use that as a template to map out your own arrangement. Now, doing this will stop you looping your idea over and over again until you get sick of it and completely lose objectivity, and we've all been there. So if you're in the arrangement session and you get the urge to listen to your loop just one more time, ask yourself, will this take me closer to the goal of this session, or is it just wasting time? And finally, I'll listen through and I'll just make a long list of everything that needs adding, removing, or changing, and that list can be long. Then I'll work through the entire list, just ticking it off until it's done. Now, this bit can be boring, but fully finishing a track usually is, which is why almost all bedroom producers never actually finish a track. Please don't be like them, and using these steps will help. Number 5 is eliminating distractions, and you know what it's like to get into the flow with music production. Time seems to just fly past and you're completely absorbed in it, and this is beautiful. This is what's really enjoyable about music production. But every time you get distracted from that flow, it's 15 minutes to get back into that same state. So we need to be disciplined in removing distractions. So for example, you could leave your phone in the other room, turn off the internet if you can, and have enough drinks and snacks close to hand if needs be. Then definitely let the rest of your family or your other half not to disturb you during this production time, on pain of grave consequence. If you plan it in advance, your loved ones are usually very understanding, so it's worth doing. I guarantee you'll produce more in 1 power hour than 3 hours with distractions, and make that a power 4 hours, and you'll completely forget the world exists. Just don't forget to blink. It's easily done. I've often woken up in the morning and my eyes still feel sore from staring at the screen the night before. I'm pretty sure that's not good. Okay, the 6th thing is the big daddy of production, and that is to create a process or processes. We all want to get better at producing and become more efficient and effective with our time, so whenever you need to repeat a task or a process, ask yourself, is there a faster, better way of doing this? The chances are there usually is. What I find really help is doing what I call my 10-minute track teardown at the end of every project. I'll save out the sounds and effects I really like, maybe I'll bounce a couple of them as well, saving them into my favorites folders so I can use them in another project moving forwards. A successful producer friend of mine takes that one step further, and he literally starts a new project using a previous one that he's created. He already knows that the sounds are going to work really well together and are kind of half mixed already, so he can just compose a new track using many of those same sounds. If you listen to a few of your favorite producers, you might notice this happening. It's because they've got to work quickly and they've developed a signature sound, which is the other benefit of this approach. Not only will you produce your next track more quickly, as you'll already have those sounds as a starting point, you'll start to develop your signature sound over time as you use some of the same sounds over and over. This is a good thing if you want to stand out and develop your own sound. Now, batching certain tasks is another way to systemize your process, like mixing several tracks in one session, for example. Then your headspace is in mixing mode rather than composing mode. And the 7th really important thing to speed up your workflow is to watch this video next. There are 14 ways to simplify the mixing process, which will cut down your production time by hours for every track you make, and take out a lot of that frustrating trial and error. Before you head over there, if you enjoyed this video, please hit like and subscribe to my channel. It really helps me out and I appreciate it, and I'll catch you over at that next video.